Hard rain's gonna fall, means something's gonna happen.
At about the midpoint of The Fourth Turning is Here, the author maps our crisis in relation to historical fourth turning patterns. The book is called The Fourth Turning is Here, What the Seasons of History Tell Us About How and When This Crisis Will End. And here we have two timelines. The timeline of our previous fourth turning, the World War II crisis, and of our current millennial crisis. As we fill in these timelines, we get an idea of where we currently are in our crisis and get an idea of what may be coming based on the patterns of our previous history blocks. A fourth turning is preceded by a precursor that occurs towards the end of the previous third turning. The precursor event shows that while our society may be unraveling, we still have the chutzpah to meet a national challenge. The precursor to the World War II crisis was the U.S. involvement in World War I. The country was against it, but once we went in, the country supported it. The precursor to our millennial crisis was the 9/11 attacks and our subsequent involvement in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. According to the book, a precursor briefly foreshadows the mood of the coming crisis era by showing how a society aware of its own weakening civic instincts can still galvanize and rise up to meet a new challenge. A catalyst is an event that marks the beginning of the fourth turning. The catalyst puts us in crisis mode. We see the catalyst coming, but we don't prevent it. When the catalyst arrives, we fall into a mood of pessimism and paralysis. The catalyst that began the World War II crisis era was the 1929 stock market crash. The Great Depression followed. The catalyst that began our crisis was the 2008 financial crisis. During a regeneracy, people start to get pissed off and politically active. People begin to organize themselves into groups. Political groups, racial groups, class groups, ideological groups. Regeneracies generally occur in two phases. During the World War II crisis fourth turning, Regeneracy 1 was the election of FDR in 1932, 9 years before the U.S. entered World War II. It was during FDR's inaugural address when he said,
"The only thing we have to fear is fear itself."
He was talking about the Great Depression, not World War II. Folks elected him because he said he would end the Depression. FDR was way less informed about economics than his opponent, Herbert Hoover, but the electorate elected FDR anyway because they were sick of Hoover and the Great Depression that Hoover presided over. The electorate was pissed off, and they wanted the Depression to end. FDR said he would wage a war against the Depression as if it were an invading foe. His election and inauguration speech regenerated a sort of team spirit that had been missing from the country during the Roaring Twenties. The Roaring Twenties were a third turning era of increasing individuality. A regeneracy regenerates a sense of community or commonality. A regeneracy regenerates a sense of common mission. But sometimes a regeneracy splits the nation in two. Two teams, each with their own ideas about how to overcome the crisis at hand. Our millennial crisis regeneracy was the 2016 presidential election, Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton. Both sides were pissed off about the way things were going in the years after the great financial crisis of 2008. Both sides hated their opposing presidential candidate. Donald Trump supporters hated Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton's supporters hated Donald Trump. Each of the two factions began to regenerate a sense of unity that had unraveled during the highly individualistic days of the booming 90s and early 2000s. When I was growing up in the 1990s, young people almost never talked about politics or political issues. And since the 2016 election, it feels almost as if we Americans are at war with folks whose politics differ from ours. It seems as if there is nothing that can unite us. During the previous first regeneracy, FDR enacted his New Deal programs, trying to put people back to work and get the economy working again. Labor unions gained power, and the American Communist Party gained popularity. The industry versus labor battle seemed almost like a civil war.
We workers have nothing in common with the employers. We're in a class struggle. In Minneapolis, the Teamsters strike effectively paralyzes the city, and class war threatens as the Yale Club of Minneapolis leads an anti-labor march in which 2 strikers are killed. In Georgia, Governor Talmadge sets up concentration camps for strikers.
Meanwhile, actual war was breaking out in Europe, and Americans were further split on whether or not the U.S. should get involved. The second regeneracy, the second come-together moment, came during the spring and summer of 1940. Germany took over France, and Germany began bombing Britain. Imagine getting that news. Germany has taken over France, and now Germany is bombing England. Southern congressmen who hated FDR now agreed with him that the U.S. should prepare for war. This preparation for war began to regenerate the sense of unity that had split because of political disagreements and industry versus labor battles. We have not yet entered our crisis's second regeneracy. We have not yet experienced our fourth turning's fall of France or Battle of Britain. And obviously, there's no guarantee that we will experience a second regeneracy. But according to the book, fourth turnings unfold in a pattern of events and reactions. And here is how the World War II fourth turning unfolded in relation to these fourth turning patterns. At some point after achieving its final regeneracy, society experiences a consolidation, the moment when all members of the dominant new community understand that they are engaged in an ultimate struggle for survival. While hopes and fears mount, uncertainty subsides, everything rests on this one outcome. After the consolidation, the community unites in maximum collective energy and efficacy. Most people who haven't yet chosen sides must now choose. Leaders redirect every available institution toward a common goal. During the World War II crisis, our consolidation event was the Japanese attack on our naval fleet at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The United States declared war on Japan the next day. 3 days later, the United States declared war on Germany. All hands on deck and all in. At the time of the attack on Pearl Harbor, the American military consisted of less than 500,000 people. After Pearl Harbor, and for the next 3 years, the military grew by 500,000 people every 2 months. All hands on deck and all in. We have not yet experienced our consolidation. We have not yet experienced this crisis's Pearl Harbor moment. And to be clear, it's not guaranteed that we will experience a Pearl Harbor event. This book presents us with a historical theory, not math. The climax of a crisis determines whether the new order will or will not prevail against its enemies and obstacles. Will we win the war? The World War II crisis climax came in a trifecta of events, beginning with the Allied invasion of German-held Normandy, France, aka D-Day, on June 6, 1944. Then the Battle of the Philippine Sea 2 weeks later on June 19th and 20th, 1944.
In the Battle of the Philippine Sea in 1944, naval air scored its greatest triumph over Japanese carrier aircraft. Now remembered as the Marianas Turkey Shoot, Navy gunners on ship and in the air, and in the space of 1 day, shot down 400 attacking enemy planes. Japanese naval air was ruined.
The U.S. Fifth Fleet defeated Japan's carrier-based Air Force.
And the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki ended the war with grave certainty.
We have not yet experienced our crisis's D-Day, Battle of the Philippine Sea, or Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings, nor is it inevitable that we will. During a crisis resolution, a clear victor emerges. Victors are rewarded and enemies punished. Nations or empires are forged or destroyed. Treaties are signed and boundaries redrawn. Peace is accepted, troops repatriated, and ordinary life begins anew. One large chapter of history ends and another starts. In a very real sense, one society dies and another is born. After the World War II crisis, the United States emerged as the world's preeminent power. We got the United Nations and the World Bank. There is no guarantee that the United States will emerge victorious from our current crisis, but I've got my money on her. After the World War II crisis resolution began the post-war high, our history block's first turning. Rock and rollin' Corvettes. Lots of movie cameras, too. In America's first crisis, she fought for her independence against a global power and founded a new nation. In America's second crisis, she fought to keep the nation together, and in doing so, freed her slaves. In America's third crisis, she saved her citizens from impoverishment, helped free Western Europe, and secured a system of global trade with her allies, becoming the most powerful superpower in human history. And in America's fourth turning, perhaps she's here.